Spirit Hill goes back to the Granville Grants, which are the King's Line grants that were originally granted back in the 1750s before the Revolutionary War. Joseph Carruthers, who was the sheriff of Craven County, actually was granted the land where Spirit Hill is located. Beyond that bit of history, there's not a whole lot known about the property. The county was established in around the same time that the land was granted, and it was originally established by William Pitt to remove Chatham County from Orange County during the War of Regulation, protecting American rights from British Parliament, which eventually led to the Revolutionary War. The Carbonton Dam down the road, which was originally built by Mr. Dodds, was taken back after the Revolutionary War because he was a supporter of Britain, and his land was then sold to the Tysons. Now Dodds had a mill on the property with a small dam. The Tysons rebuilt the mill with a larger dam, and that mill was then rebuilt again in, I want to say, 1921 as a power dam to power the area. But the name Spirit Hill actually just pertains to this hill where the house is located, and it's a name that was given to the property by locals, not because we're sitting on top of an Indian burial ground, although Indians are from the area. Spirit Hill refers a little more to what I would call the industry of the area. If we go back to when the current house on the property was built, and I have reason to believe that the current house that was built was actually built on the home site of an even older property. But the current house that was built roughly around the 1900 era, slightly earlier, 1890s to 1910, somewhere in that range. And during that time, the only thing that was really going on right here was that there was a very hot coal mining industry. There was the Egypt mine and the Coal Glen mine. The Egypt mine, it was kind of a hit or miss. It routinely started up and shut down, had a lot of problems, a lot of explosions. The mining industry really didn't have a boom until that 1895 period to 1925. And in 1925, which really ended the coal mining boom here in the Carbonton area of North Carolina, was an explosion, the largest industrial catastrophe in the United States. Was Coal Glen mine exploded and killed 53 people. Just counting between 1895 to 1925, over 100 people died between the Egypt mine and the Coal Glen mine. So there was a lot of coal mining activity going on in this area, which might explain why you have, a roughly, 1,500 to 2,000 square foot house that went up in that time frame. The other thing that was going on during that time is the coal industry was heating up. Back in the 1850s and 60s, the saloons in North Carolina were blowing up, and so North Carolina moved towards regulation to limit alcohol in the state of North Carolina. And even before the Prohibition, which was in 1920, North Carolina had a prohibition on alcohol and spirits that started in 1903, where alcohol couldn't be distilled in unincorporated areas. By 1908, North Carolina had a ban on all alcohol sales within the state. And so by the time the 1920s Prohibition period came, North Carolina was already 15 years into their own prohibition on alcohol. So seeing how North Carolina was so early into the Prohibition period, and they actually came out of the Prohibition period late. The Prohibition period ended in 1933. North Carolina didn't start allowing alcohol sales in the state again until 1935 or 38. And even then it was on a county by county basis. and the state required that the alcohol be sold in government-owned stores. So they would collect the taxes on it. That store system is now called the ABC stores. What was happening when this house was being built, and where the wealth came to establish such a residence or other things in the area, definitely led back to the coal mining industry, but it also leads back to one of North Carolina's claims to fame, which is the moonshine industry. North Carolina is the moonshine capital of the United States historically. With the moonshine industry in North Carolina, it really took off in the late 1800s as saloons were being shut down, continued to grow dramatically from 1903, and actually the moonshine business grew all the way up to the 1970s because North Carolina didn't allow alcoholic beverages for sale by the glass until 1978. The moonshine industry really kind of thrived in the state of North Carolina, and moonshiners and bootleggers actually fed the growth of NASCAR in the state of North Carolina, another claim to fame for the state, because when you're in the moonshining business, and back in those days they had a lot of modified vehicles, because in order to be successful you had to be fast to outrun law enforcement. But that brings us back to this property. We don't know a whole lot about the history of the property, when it was built, why it was built. But what we do know is that on this property they used to call it Spirit Hill because there were spirits and moonshine that were made in spots around this property. The moonshine industry was definitely here on this property, and as the locals call it Spirit Hill, it definitely has its claim to fame. As the Prohibition period ended in the 1930s and going into the 1970s, there were actually secret bars on the property. There was a bar that entertained probably up until the late 1950s or so, and then going into the 1970s. The name Spirit Hill doesn't really refer to the deadly souls of some Revolutionary War or Civil War. It actually dates back to the moonshine era of North Carolina. That era is when this house was built,